Hello and welcome. I'm Tom Burges Watson. You are watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya headquarters. These are our top stories. The leader of Hezbollah says this week's deadly attacks, in which his operatives' radios and pagers exploded, crossed all red lines. He pointed the finger of blame squarely at Israel. Israel bombs southern Lebanon overnight as it declares a new phase of the war with the regional militant group. And the FBI says Iranian hackers sent messages from the Trump campaign to those involved in Biden's re-election bid before he dropped out. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. First, the leader of Lebanon's Hezbollah gave a televised address earlier on this evening. This was Hassan Nasrallah's first appearance since Tuesday and Wednesday's unprecedented attacks, which targeted pagers and walkie-talkies used by members of his organization. Well, at least 37 people are known to have been killed and around 3,000 others were injured. Well, Hezbollah blames Israel for those attacks, and in his address, Nasrallah said that Israel had crossed a red line. Well, as Nasrallah spoke, Israeli warplanes broke the sound barrier over Beirut, and earlier in the day, both Israel and Hezbollah carried out cross-border strikes. The Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said today that his country is at the start of a new phase in the war.
Thousands of pagers were targeted by the Israeli enemy and detonated simultaneously. With this operation, the enemy crossed all rule, laws, and red lines. It didn't care about anything at all. Not morally, not humanely, not legally.
Hassan Nasrallah speaking there. Well, he went on to say that this week's deadly attacks on Hezbollah's communications devices had dealt the group a severe blow.
There is no doubt that we suffered a major blow, both on the security and the human front, which is unprecedented in the history of the resistance, at least in Lebanon.
Well, for more analysis, I'm joined now by the senior fellow at the Washington Institute and an expert in Hezbollah, Hanin Ghaddar. Thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. You've written about and researched Hezbollah extensively. I just wondered whether you'd watched today's address, and if so, what stood out for you in Nasrallah's address today?
Yes, absolutely. There are three things actually that stood out. One, it was obviously addressed to his own people. So it comes to Hezbollah's constituency, the Shia community that had to watch up close and personal what happened on Tuesday and Wednesday. And obviously the panic in Lebanon, we all know that the fear is there. For this speech is not addressed to Israel because there was no threats, no promise of response, no strategic outline of Hezbollah's, military capability or anything. It was addressed to the community because the panic is real. And Hezbollah has one of their challenges after this, in addition, of course, to the broken communication systems that they have to recover and they don't know how. One of the main issues is that the trust. Before Tuesday, before this pagers operations, people felt that they are protected one way or another. The war is localized in the south of Lithuania and some other areas. Hezbollah is targeted, but the people felt more or less safe around Hezbollah. Today, they do not feel safe around Hezbollah because they're simply blowing up in their faces. And two, the trust within Hezbollah itself is broken because of the infiltration of Israeli intelligence into their ranks. So this is a serious issue of trust that they have to rebuild, and this speech was directed at trust. The other thing that stood out is his defeatment. He acknowledged that it was a big blow, and he wanted to tell the Lebanese people that yes, it's a big blow. However, there's always a however, because there's no acknowledgement of defeat. There's always a however. And however, there is an achievement that we cannot forget, which is moving the buffer zone or the security zone into northern Israel. And it's like the achievement that he's been talking about since the very beginning of this war, and he said he's not going to give it up. And this is the third thing that stood out, which means that for Israel, for the rest of the world, for the international community who are trying to separate the two issues, which is Gaza and Gaza's ceasefire and Lebanon's front. He's telling them that this is the only achievement. We've sacrificed so much for the moving the buffer zone into Israel, and we're not going to let it go as simple as that. The sacrifices are too high, and we need something in return. That something in return probably is going to be for Iran's regional interest, negotiations over nuclear weapons. We don't know, but he simply doubled down on the North, saying that it's not going to happen, risking, of course, more escalation by Israel and Lebanon.
I mean, in the immediate aftermath of the pager attacks on Tuesday, Hezbollah said that Israel would be punished for what it did. So basically what you're saying is that Hezbollah is really not in a position to carry out such a punishment.
No, I think what happened is that the communication system is core in any military strategy. And any response that they need to do today requires communications, and their communication is broken, their morale is broken. And we saw, even when Ismail Haniyeh was killed in Zahran, and then Hezbollah was killed, Fuad Shukr, Hezbollah's number 2 in its military system, the response was really short, and they realized that any response they are going to do is going to be preempted by Israel's attacks. They witnessed that before. They still are trying to figure out really how penetrated but they are by the Israeli intelligence apparatus, and they need to be secure from this intelligence. They need to counter this intelligence. They need to figure out a way to communicate with each other. They need to recover the trust issue before they fathom the response. And also, any response that is short of really harming Israel is not really a response. It will look more pathetic. They will look weaker. But the problem is that if they start using their actual military assets, we're talking here about the guided missiles, the precision-guided missiles, and the long-range missiles. They haven't used really these. They haven't used their ground forces. They haven't really used the military assets that are there actually to protect Iran. So if they really want to use any of these, it's a huge provocation for Israel. And the appetite for war in Israel is growing. And any provocation would lead Israel to justify any escalation in Lebanon. And that's not something that Hezbollah would want. Nothing has changed in that regard. Hezbollah still prefers to keep its weapons safe and intact for the battle that would target Iran, not Hamas. So nothing has changed in that regard, and they're incapable really now of doing this. Until they recover, they can't respond.
Yeah, I mean, the funerals were held today for some of the Hezbollah fighters who've been killed in the last couple of days. And as you're saying, Nasrallah looking extremely weak. Well, thank you very much indeed. We really appreciate you taking the time to speak to us. Really great to have your analysis. Thank you so very much indeed. According to the US authorities, Iranian hackers passed on stolen information from Donald Trump's presidential campaign to President Joe Biden's campaign team. They're also accused of passing on this confidential information to journalists as well. This is thought to have happened in June and July, just before Biden dropped out of the presidential race. However, there is no evidence that anyone from the Biden campaign replied to those emails. Well, for more on this, we can speak to our correspondent, Yaqub Fazeli. Thank you so much for joining us, Yaqub. Why would Iran do such a thing?
Well, the U.S. agencies, including the FBI and the two other agencies that put out this statement, they believe that it's less about supporting one candidate over the other and more about eroding public trust in the U.S. electoral process, the election system. And at the end of the day, Iran also views the U.S. as its number one enemy. The Iranian leadership refers to the U.S. as Great Satan, the Great Satan. And so any instability, any chaos in the U.S., Tehran would enjoy seeing that. Perhaps the logic here is that they are thinking with more instability at home for America, they would have less time and resources to focus on Iranian activities.
Okay, so it sounds as though in Iran, the desired outcome is more of the same and not another Trump term. Do you think that's a fair reading of why they did this?
I think the main purpose of such operations, such cyber attacks, is the main purpose, and this is something that the U.S. agencies themselves believe, is to first of all fuel division, and as I said, undermine trust in the U.S. election system. But I think if it's a question of who does Iran favor, do they want Kamala Harris or Donald Trump back in the White House? I think Iran would not want to see Trump back in the White House. And the Trump campaign itself touched on this in their response to this latest hacking incident, when they said that they argued that this serves as proof that the Iranians are doing their best to help Trump's opponents. Because at the end of the day, Trump, he abandoned the 2015 nuclear deal. He reimposed sanctions on Tehran, and more important than that, he enforced those sanctions. And also, perhaps the most notable event of his presidency in terms of Iran-related events, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani in 2020. That was a big blow to Iran. So between the Democrats, between Biden and Kamala Harris and Trump, I think the Iranians, there's reason to believe that the Iranians would favor Kamala Harris here.
Yeah, certainly the Trump campaign team using this as a sort of a badge of honor, really, saying this shows how tough he is on Iran. Do you have any indication as to how all of this surfaced, these allegations about the communications being passed on from one team to the other?
Well, we don't know exactly, because these allegations, once they were reported, the only thing we know, and the only thing that the FBI and the two other U.S. agencies that announced this, they didn't give any specific information. For example, they referred to the material that was in the emails as stolen, non-public information. They didn't elaborate any further than that. And the only other thing they said was that the recipients didn't engage, that there was no information indicating that the recipients responded to these emails. So we're not really quite sure. It's not really clear at this point.
So that's really important, though, that last point, because it does show, doesn't it, that the Biden campaign team was not in any way cooperating, that we know of, with Iran on this front.
Yeah, well, you see, just last month, the Kamala Harris campaign itself said that they were targeted by hackers. They didn't specify the origin of these hackers, where they were from. But I go back to my point that this is less about supporting one candidate over the other and more about just fueling division and exacerbating polarization in U.S. society. And so both campaigns are targeted here. So when we talk about these cyber attacks, but the question of who does Iran prefer in the White House, I think it's a separate question. And as I said, I think Iran, whilst Iran does prefer, they do prefer, I think, to not see Trump back at the White House, to see a continuation of Joe Biden's policies. I think, nonetheless, they would still enjoy witnessing this kind of chaos and to this kind of instability in the U.S.
Yeah, I mean, when we've talked about foreign influence operations in elections in the United States in the past, it's usually been with regards to Russia or China. How long has Iran been engaged in this type of activity, do we think?
I think starting with the 2016 election, at the time, there were some reports, but the focus at the time was on the Russian hackers. In the election that followed in 2020, we also had some more reports about Iranian alleged interference, and now we're seeing this again. I think since 2016, I would say Iran, ramped up its efforts in this area. And I think as time goes on, I think as long as they don't feel deterred, I think we will see more of this.
Okay, well, thank you very much indeed for speaking to us. Al Arabiya correspondent Yaqub Fazeli, thank you very much indeed.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.
Let's get a brief check of some other stories we're following for you here on Al Arabiya. In response to this week's walkie-talkie and pager attacks in Lebanon, the German flag carrier Lufthansa says it is suspending flights to Beirut once again. The airline says the suspension would continue until late October, but that they'll reassess the situation in the days ahead. Well, passengers who are affected can rebook or they can ask for a refund. Passengers travelling on flights from Beirut are banned from bringing walkie-talkies and pagers. The ban will remain in place until further notice. Well, meanwhile, the Lebanese army says it is destroying pagers and suspicious telecom devices in controlled explosions in various parts of the country. And the Japanese brand of walkie-talkie linked to Wednesday's explosions in Lebanon says it did not manufacture these particular exploding handsets. A spokesperson for the company, which is called ICOM, says they stopped making this type of device a decade ago and that most of those on the market are counterfeits. Let's get some more analysis so we can cross to Lebanon now and speak to the deputy editor of the political desk at L'Orient-Le Jour, Salah Hijazi. Salah, thank you for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya. Hassan Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah, gave a speech tonight. I'm assuming a lot of people there in Lebanon stopped what they were doing and they listened to what he said. What grabbed the headlines there from that address, do you think?
Indeed, everyone here in Lebanon was waiting for Hassan Nasrallah to speak because however Hezbollah reacts to the pagers attack would probably determine the future of the support front that the party opened in support of Hamas in South Lebanon. What was particularly interesting in that speech was how classical it was. It was really a very usual speech without any kind of surprises or big announcements, despite the fact that Hassan Nasrallah described the attacks of Tuesday and Wednesday as huge and severe blows to the party. However, he claimed that Israel was not able to achieve its objectives despite the strength of that attack, saying that Israel was not able to weaken the party internally, destroy its internal structure, or force it to suspend the support front in order to allow for the return of tens of thousands of Israelis to the north of Israel.
So clearly Lebanon's still very much on edge. We've had these two waves of exploding devices there. There were pagers on Tuesday, walkie-talkies on a Wednesday. Is there a sense of nervousness that there could be more booby-trapped devices in circulation there?
Indeed, we've seen people throwing their phones away. We've seen people panicking about solar panels, about smartwatches, and all kinds of devices. The army, as we said, is currently trying to destroy suspicious devices. During the speech of Hassan Nasrallah, the Israeli military performed a sonic boom on a very low altitude over Beirut, and it did create a huge shock among the people here.
Yeah, it created a lot of noise, and I'm assuming there was a message in that as well, wasn't there?
Exactly. Yeah, it's basically Israel telling everyone Hassan Nasrallah cannot keep you safe.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask you what's been happening on the border today, on both sides.
It seems like Hezbollah is claiming many attacks, a bit more than usual. Israel, on the other hand, performed a very big amount and very strong attacks right before Hassan Nasrallah's speech, which again seemed like a message to the party and to the people of the South.
And just lastly...
But so far we're still... Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So far we're still within the rules of engagement. Of course, if you put aside the pagers attack. The rules of engagement that were implicitly agreed upon on October 7th.
Okay, and I was just going to say, and lastly, is there a sense of relief there in Lebanon that today has passed without any new twists in this plot, and there haven't been any further cases of exploding devices there today?
I think we still have to wait and see how people will react, especially after Hassan Nasrallah's speech, where he did mention that the party will punish Israel for the sabotage operation. However, he seemed to say that it's going to be a secret operation, and he did not say when. He said it could take weeks, months, years. So it seems like we are headed towards some kind of repetition of the scenario of the last big attack by Israel, which was the assassination of the party's military leader, Fuad Shukr.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Hezbollah.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Deputy Editor of the Political Desk at L'Orient-Le Jour, Salah Hijazi. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much. Happy.
Let's get a check of some other of the day's top stories. The United States has imposed sanctions on Thursday on a network of 5 groups and 1 person based in Russia and the Georgian region of South Ossetia. This for enabling illicit payments between Russia and North Korea. Well, in a statement, the Department of Treasury said today's sanctions demonstrate that Putin's regime's use of illicit financial schemes had enabled Pyongyang to access the international banking system, which is a violation of the targeted sanctions laid out by the UN Security Council resolutions. Russia is ramping up drone production to 1.4 million. Speaking at a meeting of the Industrial Military Commission today, President Vladimir Putin highlighted the need for weapons, military and special equipment has increased significantly. Well, Putin told members of the Commission that the output of major armoured vehicles had doubled compared to last year, while production of the most in-demand weapons has tripled. And Mpox vaccines have been administered in Africa for the first time, with several hundred high-risk individuals vaccinated in Rwanda. The African Union's Disease Control Centre, the CDC, said that the first 300 vaccinations were administered on Tuesday near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. The US Central Bank has lowered interest rates for the first time since the beginning of the pandemic. Their aggressive half-point cut comes amidst concerns over a slowing job market. Well, the Federal Reserve's decision should bring relief to households and businesses that are straining under elevated rates, and it's likely to influence borrowing costs around the world. Kate Fisher filed this report from Washington.
As more Americans look for work, the country's central bank has taken decisive action to keep the job market from slowing any further, while also trying to keep inflation in check.
This decision reflects our growing confidence that with an appropriate recalibration of our policy stance, strength in the labor market can be maintained in a context of moderate growth and inflation moving sustainably down to 2%.
Inflation has been easing towards those normal levels after a post-pandemic peak of more than 9%, something that Fed leaders expect to continue. Those leaders applauded by market watchers who'd been waiting for a cut.
Bravo, Jay Powell. Bravo. I am very happy. 100% that is the right move, and we're just beginning. But I really think the markets needed to see the 50 basis points to just move us up here. We really got behind the curve.
That's good news for Americans with mortgages, car loans or credit card debt, offering them some relief as the Fed signaled that interest rates will lower further, with another 50-point rate cut expected before the end of the year and more to come in 2025. Kate Fisher, Al Arabiya News, Washington.
Germany is planning some $445 million in extra military aid for Ukraine this year. That's despite a row over budgetary constraints. The news agency AFP is reporting that a letter from the Ministry of Finance outlines this planned expenditure, earmarking funds for additional drones and air defense equipment, amongst other things. And Brazil's Supreme Court has today ordered the social media platform X not to try to circumvent a previous ruling that suspended the platform in the country. Should X, which is owned by Elon Musk, continue its service, the company would face a fine of more than $900 million per day. Well, in August, the Supreme Court ordered Brazil's internet and mobile services to block the platform. Now, a sports story we're following for you now. The world's former #1 professional golfer, Rory McIlroy, has publicly challenged Ian Poulter's hopes of captaining the Ryder Cup. In an exclusive interview here on Al Arabiya News, Poulter expressed hope for future involvement in the Cup. Here's what he told my colleague Rosanna Lockwood.
Look, it goes without saying that if you cut me in half, in there's like a stick of rock that says Ryder Cup. I've been part of so many Ryder Cups. It's been a huge part of my golfing life. It's some of the most proudest moments of my career. The opportunity to be able to be captain, because as it stands today, that's not going to happen. But look, I would love that opportunity. I would love to lead a team out.
That was Ian Poulter speaking to this channel, but McIlroy has responded, casting doubt on that scenario, saying it's because they no longer have a connection with Europe's emerging stars after defecting to Live Golf. Let's get a quick reminder of our top stories on Al Arabiya. The leader of Hezbollah said this week's deadly attacks, in which his operatives' radios and pagers exploded, crossed all red lines. He pointed the finger of blame squarely at Israel. Israel bombed southern Lebanon overnight as it declares a new phase of the war with the regional militant groups. And the FBI says Iranian hackers sent messages from the Trump campaign to those involved in Biden's re-election bid just before he dropped out of the race earlier in the summer. That is all we have time for. Coming up next is Hadley Gamble interviewing Prince Turki Al Faisal, and a repeat of her previous interview with the US envoy to Yemen, Tim Lindeking. That's at later on. And then at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time, please do join my colleague Rosanna Lockwood for today's edition of Global News Today. That is a roundup of top international news with exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers.